Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Leading into Crisis podcast. On this podcast, we share stories from the front lines of crisis communications. I'm Tom Mueller. Quick shout out to our listeners who have helped the podcast be named to the top 10 best management podcasts in Texas, as rated by the good folks at FeedSpot, which is a content aggregator and a media rating firm. So we're very thankful for that recognition of our efforts here at the podcast. And we're sort of steadily climbing their ratings system over there. On today's show, we're going to dive once again into the realm of artificial intelligence in the communications and crisis management space. As you know, we like to dive into AI issues here on the podcast when there's something new and exciting evolving here. And if you read the FT or the Wall Street Journal, you know there's always something interesting going on in this space. So today, no exception. Our guests with us are founders of a company known as Albie.ai, which focuses its efforts on helping communicators be more efficient and impactful using AI tools. So our guests are the founders of that firm, Chris Hamilton and Peter Heneghan, both of whose careers are just steeped in digital comms and leadership roles. So Peter and Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you
It's
very
great
much.
to be here, Tom.
Hey, I'll get into your backgrounds a bit more in just a little bit, but I want to just kind of open it up right away. What's the top line sales pitch for Albie.ai for those communications professionals out there today?
Did you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think you started to get at it, Tom, in your great intro there. But really, we're targeting corporate affairs and communications teams, and what we want to do is really help them harness AI, but in a strategic, safe, but also swift way. So, in other words, really trying to accelerate teams. At the moment, they're in a really often in a very experimental or pilot mode with AI. There's been so much noise, so much talk about it. There are a lot of people out there offering a lot of services. Often it's quite kind of long term and theoretically based. And we're really trying to help people in a very practical way learn how to the best ways to try out AI, to embed it in the ways of working, and really start to understand how strategically over the longer term it's going to be helpful and change the way that we work. Because that's something that we believe very, really fundamentally about AI is that, it's not the same as a lot of the technology revolutions that we've seen, even just in our careers, relatively short as they've been, including obviously the rollout of the web, social media, obviously the ubiquitous nature of smartphones and similar technology. AI is sweeping through everything, and it's going to sweep through corporate affairs and corporate communications. Absolutely no doubt about that. And people have got to get their head around it. And we're here to help them with that. And we do that by combining expert advisory. So we'll come in and talk to leadership, to teams about what AI means for them. Training, learning and development is our big pillar. And then what we're really excited by is our purpose-built AI platform, the Albie platform, which really helps teams modernize how they create, how they align, and how they respond. And you touched obviously, and we know that a big focus of the podcast is on crisis comms, and that's really important to us and a really key part of our platform. So maybe we'll get stuck into that in a little bit. But in short, we make communications faster, smarter, and better, and help teams become more confident in the AI era, which we're now entering.
And Tom, I'd add that where we're coming from is we've got deep expertise, domain expertise in communications. You've got people who are out there who are AI experts, or people who have communications. We bring both of them sort of seamlessly together. And I think where a lot of communications people we go in and speak to, they haven't quite clicked that this isn't just an evolution. When we talk about the web, we talk about the smartphone, we talk about social, they had time to grow. Like the web took a long time to really get going.
Mhm.
All that infrastructure is now in place, and we're now plugging in intelligence into that. And then that's the kind of lightning bolt moment where it all comes together really quickly. And I'm excited and a little bit worried about our profession because we know what we're good at, but we're not quite technology focused. we hope we can help communications teams bridge that gap. And our specialism is communications. We're not trying to go off and do operations and HR or other areas. We're sticking in our lane. And I think that's why we should have some success in that space.
Yeah, that's one of the fascinating things as I've researched your company a little bit is your focus on communications. And of course, that's where I spent my career. And Chris and I bumped into each other at BP in different types of comms roles over time. But you both actually have very interesting backgrounds to me. And I think the thing that struck me is that you both worked at 10 Downing Street in digital communications leadership roles there. That to me sounds like crisis communications every single day,
Yeah.
right? When you're and just in a high stress, high pressure type environment, there's always something going on. So
Yeah.
it just strikes me you've got really, sort of great backgrounds for that. And Chris, I know you've spent time at BP in very senior digital comms role. Tell us a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, sure, Tom. So I started out in journalism actually, and in fact, my very first job was with a news agency called the Press Association, which is probably the big national agency here in the UK. So think of it like a kind of Reuters or an AP, but mainly focused on UK domestic coverage. And I was straight out of journalism school. Since my one of my first stories I remember being involved in was the death of Princess Diana in that car crash in Paris back in 1997. And I was on the road with them for a couple of years. I worked up in Manchester, north of England, and also down in London, and covered, everything from kind of Manchester United, our big soccer team up in the northwest, big TV shows and what was going on with them, but also, crisis moments, albeit on the other side. So, for example, there was a major rail crash, the Ladbroke Grove train crash in West London, which I was on the ground for. And over that period, it was a massively steep learning curve. I spent most of those 2 years completely crapping myself. I didn't really know what I was doing. A lot of the time, I was learning on the job. I had great people to learn from, but it was very much kind of in at the deep end. And one of the things, of course, to be aware of is that although as Peter's just mentioned, the web grew slowly. The web was there in when I was at PA, but it was still very much the media industry was still very much dominated by press and broadcast. Those were who our customers were. They were the people who were getting the content that I was phoning in to the copy takers. And I'd come out of a press conference or I'd come away from some event that had just happened, and I'd have to pick up the phone and instantly be reading out, broadcast and newspaper copy ready text reporting what I had just seen, and that was incredibly nerve-wracking. Great experience, but I really, really felt under pressure. But it was a brilliant place to learn, that kind of crisis craft. Really, even when it wasn't a crisis, right? Because you're coming straight out of something and the pressure is on. You've got to be accurate. You've got to be able to. People have got to trust, what you're saying, what's being reported by the company that I work for, and then in 2000, I remember seeing an ad for that the BBC had put in the print edition of Media Guardian, where a lot of media jobs were advertised back then, for reporters to join its then fledgling online news service, the BBC News Online, as it was known. And I had friends, people I've been to journalism school with, who said I was crazy. What was I doing? The web was a fad. It wasn't here to stay. But I was really excited by it, and I had a sense that this is where things were going. I'm not saying I was some great fortune teller, but I just thought this looked really exciting, and I thought it would be a great place to take the skills I'd learned at PA and apply them in this new media, and especially when it came to, for example, storytelling using images and graphics and data and animation and different ways of telling stories in this new media. It was amazing. It was an amazing experience. And was it a fad? Well, I stayed there for 14 years in a variety of different roles. I ended up running the social media operation as social media was becoming a really big thing. And that's probably where I came across started coming across Peter, and I'll let him pick up on his career in a second. After the BBC, I wanted to move on, didn't want to stay there forever. I did a short time at an ad agency, and then this role came up at 10 Downing Street. And I thought, well, that wasn't part of the career plan, but what a place to work, right? For us,
Indeed.
in the UK, I mean, or globally, that black door, which is so famous, what it would be like to be walking through there as your place of work. And I just wanted to get that experience, and I was up for the challenge. So in I went, and yeah, I mean, I remember within just a few short weeks, an absolutely awful tragedy, which still resonates in the UK to this day, was it's called the Grenfell Tower disaster. It was this huge tower block.
Yeah.
Uh, Went on fire. Absolutely
Yeah. Horrible story.
horrible story. And
Horrible.
I was pitched into that for the first time in a non-journalist role. I was kind of on the inside, if you like. The government stood up a Gold Command communications operation, which I was part of. And that for me, that I mean, talk about in at the deep end again in terms of being on the inside of a crisis like that. And there were several other experiences of that over my time in Heneghan Street. We can dive into some of those. But yeah, that was, like you say, you're certainly that sort of high pressure kind of crisis like environment that was there most days, was something that I learned a huge amount from, and was a huge part of my career. And then yes, went on to BP, where I met you, of course, Tom. And again, a different take on crisis, and the approach that company takes, that in-depth approach that it takes, quite rightly, to crisis response. Incredible learning experience there. And then my last part of my career was at AstraZeneca. They just come out of the pandemic when I joined. Lots of lessons learned from that. And then, yeah, a few months ago, joined up with Peter, and we've just launched our new business at Albie.
Okay. Peter, give us a quick thumbnail of your experience that's led you to this point in our evolving universe.
Yeah, I think of myself and Chris, there's quite a lot of parallels. So I was grounded. I studied journalism, but I didn't become a journalist. I went to the BBC, worked in communications, corporate, and then I got an opportunity to work directly with um, the news team during the 2008 financial crash. And it was the BBC were breaking all sorts of stories at the time. So although I was wet around the ears, as they say in Ireland, I learned very quickly like what great journalism looked like. And during that time also, the BBC, and then I subsequently went on to a place called Channel 4, I was causing crisis for other people because our journalists were unlocking stories about, the good and the great, doing things they shouldn't have been doing. So I was able to see it from both sides, what a crisis looks like to the BBC, but then when you do onto others, true journalism, fact check and all the rest, the impact of that. So crisis has always been there or thereabout, but my big obsession has always been where is the future of communications going? So I was a very early adopter of social media. I remember getting really excited about Twitter when I first arrived, thinking, oh my God, this is bringing people together in new and interesting ways. And then I got approached by BuzzFeed. So I'm actually in New York. I'm on my first international trip with Albie. And BuzzFeed's office were just around the corner actually from here, near the Flatiron district. And I remember going in there. In fact, you may not hear it, but there's a fire engine going past at this moment in time. So there may be an actual crisis somewhere nearby. Um, but I learned so much about how to storytell in new and interesting ways. And that's kind of where Chris got back involved. He said, will you come in and speak to the team about how do you enable social media in an environment, it was during the Brexit situation,
Hmm.
and the Theresa May government. And sadly, we weren't able to get anything off the ground at that time. But when he was leaving, I applied for the role. And then suddenly I thought they were going to say, yeah, yeah, right, mate. You're not getting that job. Suddenly, I'm in charge of a 40-person team. We have a rapid response mis and disinformation unit. We've
Yeah.
got content creators. It's an incredible setup. And I remember Chris saying, look, handing over to you now, but things are going to get a lot easier. 4 months later, my boss rings me up and says, Peter, I need you in the office now. We're locking down the country. So,
COVID.
COVID. So we spent a whole time through COVID, and I could get onto that later maybe. But the one thing for me that really, really stood out was as I was leaving government, this thing called AI, and I could just see it was utterly going to transform how we communicate and the speed at which we operate. And that's where I've kind of focused the last 3 years of my career, working with all sorts of interesting organizations like the United Nations, the Agio, and many others in between. So that's kind of where I've come to so far. But I'm obsessed with the future of communications and also how do you deal with a crisis as fast and as effective as possible.
Well, yeah, it's fascinating to hear your journeys because you're, climbing the ladder of AI technology and knowledge along with the rest of us. But this to me is like a fast-moving train going by, and you guys with your venture now have sort of grabbed onto that train and are rolling with it and then trying to leverage that now to bring value for others who may not be quite at that knowledge and experience level with it. And of course, anybody tells you they've got the answers on AI, they're fibbing to you, right? It's all evolving. We're all trying to figure it out. But now you guys have put a stake in the ground with your venture, Albie.ai, and it's fascinating to see, and I just love to see entrepreneurs, diving into the deep end and grabbing hold, and let's see where we can go with it. So, what as you're talking to organizations out there and kind of selling your services, where do you see the main, or where do your clients typically see the most value in what you guys are bringing in? And I'm curious if they're skeptical or clamoring for help. Peter, when you're talking to clients, what are you hearing from them?
It's kind of twofold. It's either some big organizations, their their C-suite have basically said, get on board or else, right? They're the perfect client because they've essentially been mandated to get on board with AI. There's more of them coming about, but we're still seeing a lot coming the other way, where it's very much they're in the aware. So we have this kind of road to 2030 mapped out, and most people are in the awareness and experimental stage. And we're trying to get them to is the redesign of their communications function to take advantage of the technology. A lot. So we're either being brought in on high to say, can you audit and help us do the whole lot, which we love. And by the way, we're global by default as well. So we can work anywhere and we can work in multiple languages. And then the other thing we do is more tactical. Can you come in and do a workshop with our team or a short audit? We're happy with that as well because that's a stepping stone up.
Mm.
So it's awareness, experimentation, and then they might be ready then to take that leap. Or they may not be for another year. We don't know yet. But the
Mhm.
fact is you have to win over people's trust. It's also a cultural thing. It's work culture and technology combining here. And if you don't get the work culture set up right, the whole thing can fall apart because staff won't go with you on that journey. So I'd say that is, but Chris, you jump in. I may have missed some stuff as well.
No, I think what you said is exactly spot on. I just pick up actually, Tom, you mentioned, I thought it was a great point you made about no one knows the answers yet. And obviously we know some of the answers. And we hope that our position, our experience in terms of our backgrounds, Peter touched on that point that we're both communicators and we've got that AI digital expertise puts us on the front foot, but absolutely no doubt. And this is one of the things we stress. And I think one of the where people you talk about where people see value when they work with us, it's that we are approaching this from we're going on a journey with them. We don't come in with a mandated, this is how it's going to be. You should use this tool. This is the process you've got to, when we work with people, we want to find out how do they work? What are their priorities? What's their strategy? What's their mindset like when it comes to technology and AI in particular? And let's work with you on that. And then the other thing I think, which is very much allied to that, is the human centric approach. Like, yeah, we've both been, what did you want to call it? Dabbling in technology, innovators, driven by where our profession is going. But we are very, very mindful of both the human role that needs is absolutely paramount when it comes to AI. And it is human led. It's unfortunate that Microsoft have are using the term Copilot, right? Because Copilot is a
Mhm.
great term for what AI should be. It's a Copilot, it's a co-intelligence. It shouldn't be something that takes over by any means. So I think it's really important to stress that. And then again, final point on this, but also sort of allied to all of this is that we talk about how everything's changing. We talked about AI sweeping through, and and it is. It's going to affect every single part of the profession, everything we do. But at the same time, nothing changes. And what we mean by that is that the fundamental principles and approaches that have been absolutely core to communicators, whether that's accuracy, trust, the ability to to empathize, to build relationships. All of those things are still absolutely fundamental. And we're not these kind of tech AI, evangelicals who are saying basically you can get rid of your entire function, be replaced by robots. It's the antithesis of that. And I think again, going back to a question, that's where people see value when they work with us. That is our approach, and we're not coming in and making these grand claims about what AI is and how it's going to take over everything. I think that's really, really important.
And I should add, myself and Chris were utterly horrified. We saw this advert, billboard, um, which was in New York, and I'll get onto it next, but it basically said, "You've employed your last human." I walked past, because I haven't even told you this, I walked past it yesterday.
No, it's still out there.
Yes, it disgusted me. It's like, no, this is an augmentation of your work. Like, Tom, you're working in crisis that you have expertise in. You use an AI technology will enable you to be like at least 2x, maybe 4x your ability to do that at the pace you need to do that.
Mhm.
But if you didn't have those years of grounded experience, the technology ain't going to compensate. It may kind of, but you'll know your gut feeling will tell you whether what the AI is reading out should be said. Like some crisis, the first thing you do is nothing. It may be, I don't mean do nothing as in don't plan anything. It's the opposite. You may say nothing because
Mhm.
there may be 50 other companies who are being impacted by the same cyber attack. And whoever blinks first and speaks becomes the news story. You'll know that because you're a comms crisis expert. I won't. So
I love that analogy. This is great. Yeah, because there's a lot of judgment that goes into, and nuance to, what is our, positioning need to be on this? This is a very sensitive issue. And, we can throw it over to the AI tool and, get some help with a statement. But, boy, those are far from perfect at this point in time. And, to the,
I
yeah,
was just going
Chris.
to sorry, just to jump in. I was going to say, it's a small point, but one of the things, most people are probably aware by now that, a lot of the AI tools we use are by default, they are designed to please us, right? So they're designed to, and, people have started to spot this. This is one of the reasons why you have to be careful, for example, when, relationship advice is something that people are starting to use AI for a lot more. And you have to be careful because the AI is in a nutshell, always going to take your side, right? It's
Hmm.
very seldom is it going to say, well, but what about the other side of the story? But anyway, getting away from the relationship side, the point I was going to make is that often we find when you're using these products to help with campaign with crisis response, because they default to wanting to please you, they will also default to action, right? And as Peter just said, and as we all know, and Tom, you will certainly know more than anyone, action is one option, right? As in proaction, proactively saying or doing something in response to a crisis. Staying silent, planning, getting your ducks in a row, doing everything you need to do, absolutely do all of that. But AI will often default to put this statement out, say this thing, go public with this. And obviously, yes, you're right. It can definitely help you with crafting that. And maybe we come back around to what our product helps you with in that space.
Hmm.
But yes, it's very important that, the kind of doing nothing, at least publicly, is in the mix. And AI is not necessarily geared to that.
So Chris, let's circle right back to the product now and, walk us through a little bit of, how you see, and maybe we start with, you go into a client and, what are they looking for? What are you bringing? Where's the real value there once again?
Yeah, well, look, I'll let Peter take up the reins in a second because he's been working on the product even from before I joined and knows it inside out. But what I will say is when we go in, the first port of call is that we're not necessarily saying that Albie platform, although we are very proud of it and we think it's fantastic and is absolutely best in class, is always going to be the solution that a lot of big companies are going to be able to take on right off the bat, right? Because whether you might be baked into whether it's a Copilot or the Google workspace platform, and so obviously we're not going to come in and say we're going to be able to replicate that. And there are many things that Copilot, Gemini, Claude can do, which they're very very good at, and it's the right road to take. But I think there is risk in And if we sometimes do see this but hey, we've got Copilot, why do we need anything else? Right? And of course, what people need to remember is that those are very powerful general purpose tools. And as we all know, general purpose tools are very good at general purpose activity, but when it comes to specific activity and process sets, you really need to be thinking hard about whether you've got the right tools in your arsenal. And we all know about specific tooling that we need. I think one of the things, just before I hand over to Pete to talk a bit more specifically about the Albie platform, one of the things that we're very conscious of is, the comms tech market is is pretty immature, right? So if you think about it, and we've done a little bit of research on this, and we've got a chart that shows, there are thousands of MarTech, marketing technology products out there, right? They've got an absolute, feast of options to choose from when it comes to tooling and technology. In the comm space, it's much, much smaller. It's tiny by comparison. And I think one of the things that AI is bringing in that comms professionals really need to kind of get on board with and be aware of is, we're probably not going to catch up with the MarTech world, but comms tech is going to become much more of a thing. And we think we're really well placed in that. We think a lot of what the functionality and what people are going to get out of the Albie platform is really going to make a difference and is something that can work alongside a Copilot or a Gemini really effectively. But yeah, Peter, do you want to talk through a bit more about, when we're engaging with clients, what they're looking
Of
for
course. Yeah, and
from
as
the
before I get on, like Chris mentioned there, if your chief technology officer says you can only use Copilot, we will make that work for you because we want to be agnostic in that respect. So we know how to use all the main core tools. And there may be good reason, or there may be bureaucracy that you can't get beyond that. But at the same time, we've been building out the Albi platform. And essentially, what we've done is we mapped out every aspect of a communications role. And a lot of this was inspired actually by our time in during COVID. During the COVID pandemic, we brought together a COVID communication resilience hub, and we had media relations, we had social media and digital, we had behavioral science, um, strategic communications, and others. And there was a team of about 200 people. We're essentially trying to turn that into a single product. So it will help you write your press releases and your briefings. It will do, you know, some sentiment analysis, but not to the high level, but sometimes you only need to touch on that. It will do some of your media monitoring. We've now started to build agents which will help you do a crisis plan, but it's built on best-in-class government frameworks and behavioral science. So if you gave me any crisis right now, I will come back to you in 5 minutes with a 15-page document, what to do in the first few minutes, what to do in the first 48 hours, holding lines, statements. It's it's the 20, we call it 20, 60, 20. 20% human, 6% AI. That final 20% is utterly crucial. That plan is fantastic, but it's not the finished product. And that's when it's back over to you. Say, like Tom, if you were using a tool, you would finesse it, change it, but you're then going into your kind of crisis meeting fully prepared, as opposed to you've just got a phone call. Can you get into the office now? And you're kind of still trying to get your act together. This will
Mhm.
get you there much quicker. The same with strategy. If you have a campaign, whether it's a tactical campaign or a major campaign, we can spend half an hour using our product. You will have your entire plans, maybe even some of your creative ready to go. So that whole point of the speed at which you can now do this, built on
Mhm.
frameworks and communications at its best, is what we sort of aim at.
Yeah, it's truly amazing the time that you can save with tools like this, right? That you could, if we've got a specific incident that's developing now, we can plug in some of those criteria and parameters and output a recommended plan or strategy within a couple of minutes. That's it's a little scary actually. Maybe
And the
you
thing,
don't need that whole comms department anymore. But
I don't know. I'm the opposite. I think it allows if you have a team and they're more generalist. So I did a conference in Chicago about 4 months ago, and it was full of communications leaders from the university sector. It just happened that, after the Trump administration come in, the DNI stuff, there was just almost this perfect storm of stuff happening.
Mhm.
And the teams just were not ready for it. So they were desperate to learn how AI could help them better. A tool like what we're building would enable really good generalists to become near experts at what they do, rather than it replaces them. I think that's the main thing. We don't encourage losing team. What we encourage is
Right.
become better at what you already do.
Well,
I think the value, just to jump in there, I think the value, yes, obviously, there are cost pressures where we can see that, right? It's really clear what's going on. But I think if you look at it in the longer term, I think the sense approach is to see AI as something that can, A, free your people up to do what they're really good at. So that's building relationships, pitching, negotiating with people, ideating. One of the things communicators have, and this is almost unique in a lot of businesses, right, is that 360 view of what's going on. That's the external environment. The knowledge they have internally is absolutely huge. Those corridor brush bys with the C-suite, picking up information, knowledge of campaigns and activity, right? There's a whole load of inputs there, like let's call it data inputs, right? And AI is never going to be able to replicate that. It just doesn't have that same exposure to all of those different inputs. Whereas your comms professional and the team you have there is much more able to integrate all of that and then use the AI to help. And I think freeing people up to spend more time with the C-suite, to spend more time with the materials, to spend more time meeting journalists or stakeholders, spend more time on the ground at
mhm.
events and so on. That's, I think, ideally is where leadership should be thinking about it. And rather than, great, I can, get rid of half of my team because AI is going to do it. I think that to me would be extremely risky.
Right. So you've got, yeah, clearly it's, I come back to the Copilot term that Microsoft seems to have captured so well, but I think you're right. They've got that name down.
Mhm.
And ideally, if you're a comms professional or comms VP, you want to have some type of an AI tool that's helping your teams be more effective, um, and work faster. Now, when you guys knock on the door of a potential client, clearly, there's just boy, there's a lot of potential value here. What are some of the concerns or the maybe misconceptions that people have about this? We talked about, hey, I can downsize my team, I can save costs, but aside from that human element, what are some of the misconceptions that you're seeing out there about tools like this?
Shall I go first, Peter?
Please do.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, to start with, I think hallucination does come up a lot, and I think for comms people, I mean, I think everyone is kind of aware of this, but considering our craft, our trade, I think that it's unsurprising that's something that comes up a lot, right? Trust,
Hmm.
reputation, it's kind of at the heart of what we do, and the
Right.
fact that we're being, I think there's a bit of a feeling of, oh, we're being told to use these tools, yet when I've used it, it's spat out this nonsense. It doesn't know who our CEO is. It's made up these facts.
Yeah,
And we
there are
get,
some very real examples of that out there with boy, there was a court case here in the US a few months ago where uh, the judge or one of the staff used AI to help prepare briefs, and the AI tool made up court
yeah,
cases to cite as part of this brief. And so, yeah, the hallucination thing is real. But again, that's a vote in favor of keeping those humans involved and
exactly. And
managing it.
by the way, that example you talk about, we talk about that example. So yeah, with that made its way across the Atlantic. It's something we're aware of. There's another example recently that a lot of comms folks are aware of, which was one of the big four consulting firms prepared a report for the Australian government. And it was covered because it turned out they had to give some of the money they'd been paid for the report back because there were mistakes in the report, driven not by the use of AI. And that's one of the things that kind of irritated me about the coverage of this story. That shouldn't have been the framing, in my view. It wasn't the fact they'd used AI. I'd want them to be using AI. The problem was they didn't use it in the right way. They didn't deploy a 20-60-20 star framework where the human looked over the final report and double checked the sourcing of some of the citations that were made in the report. And that was the problem. They'd used AI and it had hallucinated apparently some of the facts made in the report and even sourced them. And of course, as humans, we're rushed. We think AI can do everything. We see a very credible looking, whether it was a quote or a data point. There's a little footnote number down at the bottom of the page.
Hmm.
It has the footnote. It all appears very credible, right? Whereas in fact, what you need to do is check those kind of things to make sure that they're right. So that hallucination is something that comes up, and and our answer to that is one, the kind of the bad news is we are going to have to get, or we need to get used to it because unlike most of the tools that we've been kind of trained to use, whether it's Google or a lot of the products we use in our work and our home life, it's not a kind of binary, it doesn't know, AI doesn't know anything, right? It's based on probabilities around the framing, the ordering of a series of words. It doesn't know whether something is right or not. Having said that, obviously it's in the companies, whether it's OpenAI or Meta or anyone else, it's in their interest to try and reduce the incidence of hallucination. But there's a lot we can be doing, right, in terms of the prompting that we do. So the more detailed the prompt, the better response you're going to get, the more context you add. And this is something we talk to teams about all the time. Have your annual report, have your strategy documents, have your tone of voice, have your a style guide as part of either built into your tooling, and that's something that the Albie platform absolutely allows you to do, or upload it to the prompt as you're making it. And that way, you will always get much higher quality results and much less instance of hallucination.
Okay, so yeah, so hallucination is a big one.
Yeah,
Any other sort of issues, questions?
I
Peter,
think,
what do
uh,
you?
I think the other thing is staff often feel undermined or worried or anxious. And I think I would say, and I say this with sincerity, I think one of our strengths is we're taking a human approach. Um, Other AI companies who are coming from an AI first rather than a communications are basically going, all right, this will replace all your staff. You're going to save a load of money. You may lose staff. You may decide that you don't need as big a team. You can streamline in certain areas, but that's not the reason for doing this. You want the ultimate goal here is that your communications protects your business or promotes your business. That's where you want to be playing in that space. And if that requires a few less staff working more smartly with technology, so be it. But we're not here to do that. But until you get people over that hurdle, that's the problem. And the other thing, I think staff always think that they know best. And why wouldn't they? They've been doing the job for many, many years.
Mhm.
But when you show them how to use AI effectively, and they already have that deep ingrained expertise in communications, that's the perfect solution. Because if you get a junior member of staff who still has to learn the ropes, give them the AI tool, suddenly they think they've jumped 3 or 4 grades. They haven't. So there's a false sense of ability.
Mhm.
Well, it's almost the opposite with the more senior people. But once they learn those key basics, how to prompt more effectively, plug in the right data, they're off to the races. They really
Mhm.
succeed after that.
Okay, yeah, it's fascinating. I love your comment there, Peter, about a junior staffer suddenly feeling very empowered with this. And the fact is, the experience, in the room still counts for a lot when you're dealing with communications issues, external facing issues, and particularly around crisis communications, right? Let's kind of turn and focus on crisis communications aspects for a bit, because there's always some key factors here around communicating in a crisis, and of course measuring sentiment from what's happening in the external world is a part of that, but also getting the tone of your statements, press releases out appropriately is there. So how do you frame Albie.ai in the crisis realm here now? Where do you see the real value when we're dealing with crisis?
Yeah, I'd say so we've built an agent specifically on best-in-class government crisis. So a few years ago, the dictionary word of the year was permacrisis. I don't know if you remember that. It was
Hmm.
about 4 years ago. So myself and Chris had basically worked through crisis after crisis after crisis. Even after COVID, we had two monarchs, a monarch and the Duke of Edinburgh passing away. Major moments for our country, a crisis in that we planned for years to do this. So we are well versed in how to deal with a crisis. The UK government has frameworks. We added in behavioral science as well. And the behavioral science comes in. How can you put out a message which actually is empathetic and understanding of the situation based on the severity? So I think our product allows you to put in any crisis. I always joke about the recent one of that company where the Coldplay concert and then the chief executive was caught on kiss cam with the
Yeah.
HR lead. Like you can't make that up. Like you would not. You couldn't say I've got to up dust down a book and it's like, right, here's how we deal with our CEO kissing the HR lady at a Coldplay concert that's gone viral. Our tool, on the other hand, because it's built off of frameworks, very quickly enables that plan to be written out. What we couldn't do, which is where there's limits, is, and this is where creativity comes in, whoever thought Gwyneth Paltrow fronting their advertising after the event, genius.
Mm.
We are looking at that and going, is there a way of getting all the best can line award-winning work into a model and also saying as a kind of curveball, would you consider this? We haven't got there yet, but in terms of a first draft crisis
Hmm.
plan, we can get you there in a matter of minutes, which is the starting point to build off of, never the end product.
And just to be clear, Tom, what we're talking about here is a product that, most big companies, right, would certainly should have their own crisis response framework. I'm sure that's one of the things you talk to, when you're talking to your clients, right? Have a plan ready to go.
Yeah.
And the idea is that the Albie platform can take that plan and have it sitting there in the background along with information about the company as much as you want. And then whether it's you're running a scenario, an exercise, or of course the real thing, you can come to the platform, the framework's already in there. So everything that you need in order to respond to a crisis, whether that's your initial draft statements, the team, the response team you want to set up, the spans of control, the reporting lines, the authorization, all of those pieces are already in there and are just sitting there waiting. There's no kind of, as Peter says, they're kind of reaching for the shelf, right? And sort of blowing dust off the book, and then, oh no, hang on, this hasn't. I mean, obviously, would still need to keep the framework updated, but it's much easier to update, right? And you take it down, you can just put in literally one line about what the crisis is, whether it's the Coldplay example Pete just referred to, or whatever it is, a sudden hit to your profits or some kind of accident. It doesn't matter what it is. You can say, this has just happened. How should we respond? Now, remember what we're saying is you wouldn't take that. And by the way, it's mind blowing. I'm still, every time we give a demo, we did a demo just last week to a group of comms leaders, and they were literally jaws dropping as they saw the detail and the speed and the depth of the response that came out of the product. And I think they were just immediately imagining what that would be like in a real situation. We're not saying you're going to take that report, kind of ping it off in an email or print it out if that's still, go into a call with the C-suite and say, here, I've got my plan. You're still obviously going to want to look at that, make sure it's up to scratch and put your own experience and creativity into it. But in terms of getting you through those first few hours of a crisis response, absolutely incredible.
As you talk to comms leaders out there at various levels, I can't help but feel a little bit depressed about the change that's coming, the speed of change that's coming, and trying to grab it and and run with it. Boy, there's just a psychological impact on this, and I guess you see that when you're talking to groups of people with jaws dropping and seeing that. But what's
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean, and I suppose I feel that I've been through several cycles, right? I worked back at the BBC when the web was coming in, and we had people who were absolutely steeped in the highest quality broadcast um, skills and experience, and as a profession, and there was a lot of as the sort of power and the implications of the web became clear. I think that sort of anxiety is palpable. And one of the things we talk about when we go into teams is, and we confront head on, we're very open about, it's not surprising there's anxiety, but I think there are ways to mitigate that. And I do think there's a lot of onus on leadership, and we've touched on some of this already today, but a lot of onus on leadership on in handling it in the right way. And I think it's important to be positive and proactive about AI, but also be clear with your teams about what's involved and what the expectations are. I think that's one thing. I think it's incumbent on leadership to help people through this. I think it's also incumbent on individuals. One of the it's a massive cliche, but still think it's true, which is that AI is not going to take our jobs. It's someone who knows AI better than us. So I think there's a mindset shift around, in the same way that we've, in our careers, right? How many big technological shifts have there been? It's been massively accelerated compared to, the decades preceding. And we've got to deploy that same sensibility and that same curiosity while guarding what we're good at and what experience has taught us about what's important and making sure that we deploy those in the right way when we're integrating that technology into our work life.
All right. Well, Chris, Peter, appreciate you guys coming on and sharing your growing expertise in the AI realm with our listeners here. This is clearly a space we're all going to keep watching as time goes by. And we certainly wish you guys the best of luck with your venture. And I would love to have you back on the podcast again, a year from now, just to see where you are and see what's the latest tech that's happening there. So thanks for joining us today.
Not at all, Tom. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been great to be on. Thank you for giving us that opportunity. And yeah, love to be back. We'll see you next year.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Leading in a Crisis podcast. Thanks for joining us. If you'd like to email the show, you can drop me a line at tom@leadinginacrisis.com. And we'll see you again soon on another episode. Take care.